There has been a ton of chatter, understandably, about Jake Retzlaff and his situation with the BYU football program. If, and it's a big if, he is unavailable to play for the BYU Cougars this fall, it puts an absolute wrench in the conference race and, more importantly, completely reshapes how we look at the Big 12.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. And that's Jake Hatch from Locked On Cougars, your #1 source for all things BYU. Thanks for making our shows your first listen every single day. We will start. Jake Retzlaff. Is he done at BYU? Is there a best case? What is the worst case? Let's break it all down with an insider in Jake Hatch. And then, how will the Big 12 standings change? Where will we find maybe a new #1 if the Cougs and Kalani Sitake must go to a different quarterback? Or will things not be affected too deeply if the QB position is changed up? And we'll end on the transfer portal. Who needs it? Not BYU, really, or Arizona State, or Iowa, or any of the contenders in the Big 12. Does it matter as much as we put that weight on it? And if you hit subscribe, we both get to keep our jobs. Jake, this is a very touchy subject and a hard topic, and I know both of us have mentioned that on our respective shows. Our thoughts and maybe the deepest empathy we can give go out to the alleged victims. All that we will talk about is still alleged, not something that has been proved in a court of law. No one has been held liable. No one has been exonerated. We will approach this topic with that in mind, and also with the love and respect that should be given to all parties involved, again, especially to the alleged victim. Jake, if the question is on putting kind of that aside to an extent, if the question is on a sports podcast, will Jake Retzlaff play next season? Is there a clear answer yet?
No, that's the simple answer to this, because there's so many variables in all this, Drake, because we have a civil lawsuit that's been filed. I've talked with enough legal experts in the past, I'd say 4 to 5 days, that say that a civil lawsuit, the earliest it probably goes to trial is 2026. Then you add in the layers of a honor code that BYU enforces pretty stringently on its student athletes and its just general students as well. And if he has been found breaking rules that involve the honor code, precedent says that he's going to serve some sort of suspension. And if he's alleged to have if he has done what he's alleged to have done in this circumstance, that means he's probably missing this season if you go by precedent over the history of BYU and their student athletes with regards to violations of the honor code of this variety. So, yeah, I wish I could say it was going one way or the other, but the simple fact of the matter is we don't have any clarity right now.
Tom Holmoe stepping out of the AD role, Santiago taking over. Does that play any role in how this is handled from the administrational level? Because if you say 2026, then we have to have a hard conversation about a guy who could be liable, could be exonerated, and if he is exonerated, could miss a football season for something that may be misconstrued.
That's the situation they find themselves in right here, Drake. Is you're right. There's a new AD in the chair. Speaking of Brian Santiago, he has had quite an introduction to being the full-time AD at BYU, because there are rumors about him losing his basketball coach like day one on the job. Then a week after he gets the full-time job, oh, wait, your star quarterback is under a civil lawsuit alleging sexual assault, among other things. Man, what an introduction to the job. But I think BYU is going to try and navigate this the best way they possibly can. But in this day and age, Drake, you think about, we have revenue share coming into effect. We've got NIL involved here. There are so many different layers to this that I don't think BYU can find themselves in any way that they're in a good spot. There's no winners in any of this. So let me be very blunt about that. And whether you play them, whether you don't, you could get hurt either way in terms of lawsuits and the like that could come up as a result of this. So I don't think there's really any easy way to navigate or wriggle yourself off the hook that BYU finds themselves on.
Yeah, if you're the athletic director of BYU or anybody in the administration and you say, Jake Retzlaff, you can play and we'll see how it plays out, then he is found liable from there and new evidence comes out and this piles on in 2026, that's a nightmare. A nightmare for a university that cannot risk that. And then on the other side, you say, hey, Jake Retzlaff, you cannot play in 2025. And then we find out, hey, his phone pinged that same night in Ogden. He wasn't even in Provo, and he's exonerated entirely. Now Retzlaff's camp is going to sue BYU for the loss of NIL and a year of eligibility or whatever have you with the program. And part of that is the complexity of what BYU is. How much of this, as a school that's the flagship of one of the fastest growing faiths in the entire world, how much of this is tied to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and that honor code that comes with it?
That's I think the main thing here, Drake, is that the lawsuit's one thing, but if you have violated the honor code, history suggests that BYU, doesn't matter if you're a random student or you're QB1 in Provo, who might be the most famous person on the entire campus, they will enforce that honor code on you. That's what history suggests. Now, I know that there have been some people out there, trust me, I've seen it online, saying that BYU's backed off enforcing their honor code rules. To my knowledge, they haven't. And that's the situation you find at hand here is, yes, the church, speaking of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they want, obviously, they're image conscious, as everybody is, but they also don't want to see a flagrant, how would you try to say this? They don't want to see somebody running afoul of the honor code of their flagship university, being trotted out there as this star football player, and then, as you mentioned, found liable for sexual assault, strangulation, battery, all these different things that are being alleged in this civil lawsuit. That's a black eye that you do not want to have put on the church or the university itself. But then you said on the flip side, if he's found to be exonerated, then you're getting sued probably on the back end by him alleging that you owe him X amount of dollars. There is a really, really tough situation, the BYU right now. I'm not sure which way they're going to go, but history would suggest that Jake Retzlaff is going to miss some time at minimum.
Yeah, I would argue that BYU has really only strengthened the honor code in that now, as you're recruiting more 4- and 5-star players, it's less of, hey, 2-star from Logan, Utah, we're going to make you a 5-star college football player by your senior year. And it's more 4-star, 5-star from LA County, come play for BYU and immediately be good. And we're going to dole out NIL money. That just means if you're going to commit to the second reference, LDS way, to the LDS faith, that from that point forward, you have to be so intentional about how you command your rules. And BYU will I don't want to say make an example out of Retzlaff, but at the very least, they must insert that if we take the honor code seriously, it applies in this scenario, even though our NIL or transfer portal or any other standard has, I don't even want to say loosened, but broadened a bit. At that point, you then must reinforce that the honor code is very real and very alive. Coming up, what you got, Jake?
I just want to insert one thing on that. You talk about the LDS way. There's a delineation there. I'll just want to clarify one thing. There are LDS church standards. There are also standards that are imposed on the students of BYU. They're different. I know that they don't sound like they're different, but they are. And that's the situation you find yourself. Speaking of BYU, is you want to see a guy like Jake Retzlaff have a great senior year and ride off into the sunset, because he's been a really feel-good story up to this point. I'm not trying to say that right now it's a feel-good story, because it's not. But the situation is, it's kind of that rock and the hard place that BYU finds itself in, because they would like to celebrate a senior year of a guy who's done a lot of good at building bridges between the Jewish faith and the LDS faith here. But the situation is, if he's run afoul of the rules at BYU, and they obviously are right in line with LDS church standards as well, it's just there's no good answer to this, but there is a delineation of the LDS way and the BYU way. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Very good. Thank you, Jake, for that. I know a lot of listeners of Locked On Big 12 have questions still about the LDS church and about BYU, and I think you continue to clarify those so eloquently. Coming up, Big 12 standings have mostly BYU at number 1 in the preseason. How does that change if Retzlaff is out? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Why is it brought to you by Monarch Money? Because I am 24 years old, ripe, green, if you will. And I check my bank account constantly, and I say, oh, where did my money go? Probably between dining out and online shopping, entertainment. I lose track, and Monarch Money comes in. My personal CFO, full financial control and visibility. Complete command center. Stop just managing your money. Start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much I was spending on takeout, and I've stopped doing that because the accountability that Monarch Money helps give me, and you can manage money with your partner smoother than ever. Set goals, Have personal accounts that you can actually share and stay on the same page. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars talking all things BYU in the very hypothetical scenario that Jake Retzlaff does not play at BYU this fall. And both of us believe that at the very least he'll serve some time on the bench or maybe be gone the entire August through December. In that case, who's next? What happens?
Well, that's the $1 million question right now, Drake, because you look at the quarterback room for BYU outside of Retzlaff. You do have two guys who have Division I experience. McKay Hillstead, a former Utah State transfer. He's a high school star from Utah County, and that obviously lends itself to maybe him being in the mix, but also Trayson Bourget, our good friend Richie Bradshaw, loves to bring up the Bourget family name, but Trayson also has played at Western Michigan, and he's got a kid from Arizona. They both have D1 experience. They just brought in a high-profile transfer in Bear Bachmeyer from Stanford as well, former four-star athlete. So you got three names there that, let's say they do come out at the start of training camp in August and say, hey, Jake's on the shelf for the time being, and we're going to have a QB competition here to figure out who's going to replace him. Those are the three names. If you're a Big 12 fan or a Cougar fan who's wondering who to pay attention to, those three names will compete. I would say from my vantage point right now, I would give the leg up to McKay Hillstead, but that does not mean that any one of these guys couldn't win that job coming out of training camp.
So let's do this. If I go to Iowa State and I take Rocco Becht out, if I go to Kansas State, take Avery Johnson out, oh my gosh, if I go to Baylor and remove Sawyer Robertson from that roster, I think those three teams look way worse. You're dropping them 3, 4, 5 spots in your Big 12 preseason standings. For BYU, do you think Jake Retzlaff means that much to this offense as guys like Robertson or Becht or Johnson would mean to other Big 12 schools?
I want to say BYU wants or wanted him to be that this year. Does that make sense? They wanted him to become that star player.
Can we, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off here, but can we agree? I don't know if he was at that star caliber last year as much as he was go win the game kind of. He wasn't the go dominate the game kind of guy. He was the go win the game guy.
That's the thing. He made plays that helped them win football games last year. But I think the lasting image for most people of last year's team for BYU 11-2 was obviously that team that just dominated Colorado 36-14 in the Alamo Bowl. Yeah. You know what Jake Retzlaff's stat line was in that game, Drake?
He was like 12 for 21 or something. Isn't it terrible?
12 of 21, 151 yards, and 2 interceptions. Yeah. They crushed Colorado in spite of that stat line from him. That tells you that BYU was more of a team, I'll say collective team, than they were about one quarterback. I'm not trying to downplay what Jake Retzlaff means to this program. History suggests when BYU has a senior quarterback, which Jake Retzlaff is poised to be, they're going to be pretty darn good. The situation is, though, they went 11-2, and at times, in spite of him having some lackluster stat lines last year. That's the thing about this, Drake, is that, yes, they may lose out on a senior quarterback who's got 17 career starts, who talked about winning the Heisman and was a guy that was poised to have a really, really fine senior year. But in many respects, you're right. You take a guy off one of the other Big 12 contenders rosters at quarterback, that probably knocks him down a peg or two. For me, I think it maybe cost BYU a win or two. That's more of where I'm at. So maybe you're thinking they're a 10-win team this year. Maybe they're an 8-win team without Jake Retzlaff.
Yeah, and that goes into how the Big 12 standings should change. And a lot of people have been on board with BYU winning the Big 12 conference next season. And Jake Retzlaff's name has been thrown around in that conversation. Hey, your quarterback is returning, and that's always a large piece. But gosh, 10 quarterbacks are returning in the Big 12. You know, the whole league has got guys that at least started a game or two last season, or some that were full-time, full-season starters. Jake, how should this shake up at the top of the league? Should BYU drop a few pegs? I mean, should we be expecting other schools not named BYU to be in Arlington?
Right now, just with the uncertainty around Jake Retzlaff, I would say you take BYU out of those two teams you probably had tabbed maybe for the Big 12 title game, but you're not going to count them out to the point that if there's some craziness in this league, because you and I have both seen the over-under win totals, there's 8 teams, if I'm not mistaken, that have either 7.5 or 8.5 wins as their over-under win total. the odds makers, our friends at FanDuel, et cetera, they really think that this is going to be a topsy-turvy league that is going to have a lot of dog-eat-dog parts to it. And that could help BYU in this circumstance. If they don't have Jake Retzlaff, just the fact that this league may not have a clear dominating program out there, that could help them stay in the mix. But yeah, right now with the uncertainty, I would absolutely have other teams pegged to go to Arlington.
Man, Jake, I not you. You're the consummate journalist. You're very professional. There were a couple times last season, even in wins, where I felt like, man, maybe A-Rod isn't exactly what BYU needs in this moment. Jay Hill has proven to be just a czar of college football defenses, and almost surprising, he's still a D coordinator, not a head coach somewhere at a lower level Division I school or even a lower level, trying to rebuild a Purdue. How much of this onus comes on A-Rod now to reset the offense and do something really not revolutionary necessarily, but at least shocking, stunning, different, and just dip down at his bag to create something brand new at BYU?
Well, that's the opportunity that exists. The reason why I would favor McKay Hillstead to be the guy if Retzlaff is unavailable is because McKay Hillstead is a true dual threat quarterback. He's not very big, Drake. I think they list him at 5'10", but he has got absolute wheels. I called his very first high school football game here in the state of Utah, his first start at Skyridge High School, which is about 15 miles north of Provo. And I remember walking out on the field, talking to the head coach of Skyridge High School, saying, "Okay, so who's your quarterback tonight?" He points over to this pint-sized kid, and I'm like, that cannot be him. Nope, yeah. It's him. And all he did, Drake, I felt like he passed for 250 and ran for 200. That's what it felt like in that game. His ability to really be a true dual threat quarterback, I think would allow a guy like Aaron Roderick to design a whole new kind of offensive system. I'm not saying that Jake Retzlaff can't run, but he's more of a quarterback who's going to make plays from the pocket and run when he needs to, whereas with a McKay Hillstead, who's got a pretty fine arm himself, you can really run a bunch of QB read option type stuff, RPO actions, and that like BYU hasn't run in many, many years, maybe since Jaron Hall was the guy in Provo, and even more than that. So it would open up new avenues for this offense to try with a true dual threat quarterback on the field. And it would give Aaron Roderick, a chance to really reassert himself as, I am an offensive genius. Watch this unfold.
Yeah, I think I want to emphasize again, it is not set in stone that Retzlaff will not play next season. And while it seems likely, I believe we would both agree likely is a term that could be used in this scenario, given the complexities involved, not just for BYU, but any university when fighting, a civil suit around this. And from there, this has to be a discussion on a sports talk show, on a podcast about BYU football, about the Big 12, about who would be next if a likely scenario unfolds. And I'm glad you brought up so many all-name team guys. It's just whoever BYU goes with, they're going to be
Eric Bachmeier, McKay Hillstead, and Trayson Bourget. Come on. Those are some good names just in terms of football players. And by the way, the other thing about Bear Bachmeier, he wears the number 47, Drake, as a quarterback. Number 47. Get ready, everybody.
Which is so BYU, it's not even funny. Those guys are all in line, and I'm sure that whoever is tabbed, if that case unfolds, will be ready to jump at the bit. Coming up, the transfer portal doesn't even matter. That's a heavy statement. Locked on Big 12, Locked on Cougars. Jake Hatch of Locked on Cougars talking all things BYU. If I were to say the transfer portal doesn't even matter, not important, that would be hyperbolic. That would be a little, you're going to have to utilize it. If you don't in this era in college football, your name is Dabo Sweeney and you're just trying to prove you can come back on the uptrend. If you're BYU, though, or Kansas State or Arizona State, the contenders of the Big 12, Iowa State in that conversation too, you just didn't really use the transfer portal for more than 2, 3, 4 pieces that could genuinely compete for a starting job right away. Why is the transfer portal not a point of emphasis for the best teams in the Big 12 right now?
I'll speak from the BYU perspective on this, Drake, because I think when BYU came into the league, they went to the transfer portal very heavily. You're talking about they used the transfer portal thinking, okay, this could really transform things for us. They brought in, I think it was 60 some odd new players in that 2023 football season. What was the result? A 5-7 year. BYU decided the year after that, okay, we're going to bet on continuity a bit more. Went 11-2. And yes, they still have used the transfer portal. I think there'd be 5, 6, maybe 7 guys off the top of my head that they added via the transfer portal this past offseason that probably are going to start or will be in contention to start for BYU, but they're more targeted in terms of who they're chasing in the portal, because I think that they learned that a program like BYU has always been about development, bringing guys in who have multiple years, get ingrained in the culture and the system that BYU operates, and then over time, they will yield better results versus going out and trying to buy guys every single year and just kind of mishmash, putting it together on the fly. There are programs that can do that. BYU, I think, learned in 2023 that's not the way that they can do it. I think that history suggests that Kansas State and Iowa State, they're also in that same mold. They understand that, hey, we're a program that maybe doesn't have the flash or the pizzazz that an Alabama or a LSU has, where they can go out and bring in guys and just kind of just switch parts out and it works out for them. We need to rely on guys who, have maybe 1, 2, 3 years in the portal. We bring them in and then we develop them over time, and the results ultimately speak for themselves.
Yeah, Alabama will get the 4th-year guy out of Texas A&M who plays cornerback and is a 5-star, was in, third-team All-SEC and can develop it under, Kalen DeBoer for a year. BYU, as I say, BYU might not get that guy. In today's era of college football, it seems like BYU from an NIL standpoint is going after that caliber of athlete. Yeah. But the way I would put it is positive attrition. A good point, even Keelan Marion, a good portion of the guys that left BYU. Yes, Keelan Marion, good athlete, and can be a game changer from a returning standpoint, or could be a game changer as an athlete. Do you have to have it? Are you going to lose a game, 2, 3 games because he's not there? I don't think so. Will you, in the end, benefit because that spot is open and you can bring in a guy who seems like more of a soapbox? Here we go. I'm not going to say every guy who transfers out of a program is a bad culture fit. And there are some schools, Arkansas is an example, that has, 40 guys in the transfer portal. That's probably not a culture fit thing. It's probably more to do with your program. At a school like Iowa State, BYU, Arizona State, Kansas State, winning at a high level year in and year out, Baylor even right now, where only a handful of guys are transferring out, they're looking for a different opportunity or they're not a good culture fit. And to me, if I'm a head coach of those programs, I say, okay, the door is right there. Thank you for your time. You enjoy your life at the next school. You were not right for us. To me, positive attrition works in BYU's favor with the way the Cougars have attacked the transfer portal, similar to other Big 12 contenders this offseason.
Well, and I'll speak on the Keelan Marion thing. BYU would love to have him in Provo, Drake. Absolutely, because he's an All-American kick returner. You don't grow those guys on a tree.
For sure.
But the other side of it is BYU's trying to build up right now a program that's going to fit within this new structure of the House settlement, should it ever get approved. That's another story for another day. But they have a revenue share, and they're approaching this as if it's an NFL salary cap. And the money that a guy like Keelan Marion was asking for from BYU did not fit within the structure of what they were looking at paying NIL wise and with the revenue share. And they didn't want to set a bad precedent with going over what they call the cap or whatever their number is to appease this kid, thinking, hey, that sets a bad precedent for somebody else who decides, hey, I'm worth this, pay me that. That would obviously hurt BYU in this era when they're trying to balance things. Yes, BYU's got pretty good funding when it comes to NIL. That's very clear. We've seen it with basketball and football.
Correct. Yeah.
But the fact is they also want to be smart with how they go about this and not be appeasing everybody all the time and really having to put themselves in some bad situations when players think, hey, I can really hold these guys. And I use the term hostage, but maybe it doesn't fit correctly, but that's kind of what it feels like in certain circumstances.
For sure. It's the case, the Wisconsin kid who went to Miami.
Exactly.
If you signed a 2-year contract, and after the first year, you're like, well, they're going to pay me way more. I have a better opportunity. I can go to the NFL in Miami, and Wisconsin's not good. I can't handcuff you to a desk at your day job when you ask to quit or put in your 2 weeks. I can't demand you give me the highest level you've got for the next year because that's how long your contract is. No, there are legal ways to exit a contract in any job, and you cannot force, nope, you're our wide receiver. You're our kick returner, our corner. You must play for us. Of course, the guy won't give 100% in what he does. So it only helps that guy exits your program in the end. And you mentioned,
Well, I just wanted to say, one thing I also mentioned about Kalani Sitake, even before the transfer portal was a thing, guys would transfer. And Kalani's whole philosophy has been, we know that BYU is unique. We know what the structure around BYU is. If it doesn't work for you, we're not going to make you feel bad about that. We're going to make sure you go out and find the right opportunity for yourself and have a positive college experience. That's been his philosophy since day one, almost 10 years ago, showing up at BYU. And I love that mentality. A lot of head coaches don't have that. It's my way or the highway. But that's one thing Kalani's always held to, is that BYU may not be for everybody. We'll try and help you understand what it's about and help you have a positive experience. But if it ultimately is not your thing, we'll make sure we find a spot for you where you can thrive and ultimately have a positive experience with football.
Yeah, I love that. If you want to leave, it behooves both parties that you go. If you stay tied to BYU because there's some obligation contractually or from a school or education standpoint, then you're not going to give your all the same way a guy who is just dying to play for the Cougars would. You want that roster spot for a guy who's going to give you 100%. I think I want to commend what the top schools in the Big 12 have done in the trade. And I don't want to take away from Texas Tech. I don't. Or Houston, who have attacked the portal hard and brought in Kansas. Really good players because they had to. Because last year was disappointing in some way, and they wanted to flex out of the portal. They can build a stronger team. I commend them, but I double commend the stalwarts, the consistent big dogs in the Big 12 are schools that are building to become that in the likes of a BYU, Iowa State, Arizona State, Kansas State, and even Baylor, who had a very similar attack. Jake Hatch, where can more folks, especially as the Jake Retzlaff situation unfolds, where can more folks find your work?
As the Jake Retzlaff news turns is what it feels like around these parts. But yeah, I Locked On Cougars, available wherever you get your podcasts, also available on YouTube. You also can follow the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Locked On Cougars. And if you want my thoughts on all things BYU or otherwise, I'm also on X/Twitter at Jacob C. Hatch.
That is Jake Hatch. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Crossover with Cougars and Dose Grande.